Hi Year 6, welcome to our English for this week. Now we're going to be looking at biography writing for this week and maybe a little bit next week, and it's going to link into our science topic on evolution. We're going to be looking at someone called Mary Anning, and as you'll learn through the lessons, she had a lot to do with fossils, and you'll do a lesson in a couple of weeks looking at fossils in our science. So today we're going to start by looking at a picture book that's been made about Mary Anning's life. That should give you an idea about her, who she is and what she did and why she is considered to be famous to do with evolution and fossils. So, before we get started, what I'd like you to have a go at is naming these celebrities. So I've got here pictures of different celebrities. Can you have a go, pause the video, naming who they are, please? Okay, so let's have a look through them. So, here, George Ezra, Lionel Messi, Lewis Hamilton, Zoella, off of YouTube, I think, Theresa May, former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, I'm sure you got her, him, you know what I mean. Can't remember that one, to be honest. You're going to have to have a look yourself. Tom Holland, and we've got Elton John here. Now, the reason I asked you to name those celebrities is because biographies tend to be written about famous people, and it's because those are the sorts of people we want to learn about. We want to learn about their lives. Now, a biography is where you write about someone. So someone would write about the life of Lionel Messi, for example. An autobiography is where you write about yourself. So that is where you write about your life. Biography, you are writing about someone else's life. Autobiography, you are writing about yourself. So they tend to have books written about their lives. And as we've just said, the reason that they are written mainly about famous people is because those are the sorts of people that are going to sell books. I don't think anyone would particularly want to read the biography of Mr. Kent, for example. However, if you had a famous celebrity, they're going to sell a lot of copies. Now we're going to have a look at a book now called Stone Girl, Bone Girl, and this is the picture book I was talking about a minute ago, and it's to do with Mary Anning, who is our focus, and it's all about her life, growing up into adulthood. While I'm reading it to you, I want you to think about effective description. There are some similes in there, metaphors, and expanded noun phrases. So let's have a look at it together. Okay, so it's called Stone Girl, Bone Girl, and I'm hoping this will work. And it's a story of Mary Anning of Lyme Regis. Now, if you get a chance today, type in Lyme Regis into Google and you can see where it is. It's in England. See if you can find where it is in the country on a map. So, let's go. When Mary Anning was a baby, she was struck by lightning. It split a huge elm tree and threw Mary right out of her nurse's arms. Her father was in his carpenter's shop when he heard the terrible news. He dropped his hammer and ran through the stormy streets of Lyme Regis. Gently, he lifted the limp body of his little daughter, and his tears flowed like rain. But then, an extraordinary thing happened. Mary Anning slowly opened her eyes. She reached out a tiny hand and touched the amazed face of her father, and the little girl began to smile. It was then her father realised Mary Anning was no ordinary girl. Remember, this is all based off of truth. This is all actually the life of Mary Anning. It's not made up. The years rolled by like waves. Mary Anning grew into a clever girl. A mind as quick as lightning, her mother teased. As quick as lightning. What device is that the authors used? Mary had few friends, except her father, whom she adored. Like everyone else in the town, she called him Pepper because of his speckled beard. One Saturday, Pepper closed his workshop early. He took Mary down to the cliffs by the crashing sea. She held tightly to his hand because she knew how dangerous it could be. The clay cliffs at Lyme Regis are soft as melting chocolate. Mary had sometimes seen huge slabs of land slipping and tumbling to the beach below. Pepper had stories of whole fields of the cliff tops, which had disappeared beneath the feet of the grazing cattle. He knew a place, he said, where half a farmhouse sat balanced on the cliff edge. He and his quarryman friends had peered over and seen the remains of the kitchen and even the garden gate smashed to splinters on the rocks below. When they came to the place called Black Ven, Pepper reached into his pocket and, to Mary's surprise, took out his best steel hammer. He knelt beside a large rock of dried clay and began carefully tapping away. "What are you looking for?" asked Mary, dancing about on the sand. "Just be patient," laughed Pepper. He worked as carefully as if he were making a fine piece of furniture. Mary bent closer. There was something hidden there, right inside the rock. At last, Pepper pulled it free and handed the thing to Mary. It's treasure," she gasped. "It's what we call a little snake stone," smiled Pepper. "Just a curiosity, a present for you, Mary girl." It was the most beautiful thing Mary had ever seen. Back in the workshop, Pepper polished the snake stone and hung it on a string for Mary, like a perfect necklace. That night, Mary couldn't sleep. Her head swirled with thoughts like the twisting golden stone. "The cliffs are full of treasure," she whispered over and over again. From that day on, Mary spent every spare moment searching for the curiosities. She had sharp eyes and found them everywhere, in every shape and size, tiny, shiny stones, marble ones as big as millstones, others straight as stone fingers, or delicate like plants. Pepper taught her their strange, magical names. Thunderbolts, fairies' hearts, crocodile's teeth, devil's toenails. He let Mary have her own special drawer in the workshop for her collection. Bull, the other children laughed and teased when they saw but the other children laughed and teased when they saw Mary hunting near the cliffs. Someone made up a rhyme, "Stone girl, bone girl, out on your own girl," until Mary ran crying to Pepper. That winter was the wettest and stormiest the town had known. Great waves smashed the little houses, and the cliff became softer and more dangerous still. So Mary stayed away. The cold, damp air made Pepper feel ill. He looked old and tired, and sometimes he coughed so loudly that Mary felt afraid. One evening, some rich ladies came to Pepper's workshop. Mary knew who they were. The Philpot sisters, who lived together in a fine house high above the town. Scientists, people said. The youngest of the ladies, Annie Philpot, wanted Pepper to build a glass-fronted cabinet to display curiosities, she said. Mary jumped up. She couldn't believe that someone else was interested in the curiosities. "Excuse me," Mary said nervously. "Would you like to see my collection?" And she pulled open the drawer. "Oh," gasped the ladies. "What wonderful fossils." Fossils? Mary had never heard the word. The Mrs. Philpot smiled. They could see that Mary didn't know much about her collection. "I'll tell you what, Mary," said Annie Philpot. "When Pepper has finished my little cabinet, why don't you bring it to us? We could have some tea, and then we'll show you our collection." For 3 long weeks she waited for Pepper to finish the cabinet, but he seemed to be working more slowly than ever. Mary was very worried about him. But at last the elm cabinet was finished. The wood was from the very same tree that had been struck by lightning and had almost killed baby Mary. She thought it was the most handsome thing that Pepper had ever made. Slowly, Pepper wrapped the cabinet in brown paper and tied it with string. His old hands were shaking and he kissed Mary. Everything that was so interesting. Everything was so interesting that Mary forgot to be nervous. Then Annie Philpot showed her a huge tooth. Sorry, apologies, I think I might have gone missing here. Mary had never seen anything like the Philpotts' house. There were expensive rugs in every room, and maids to serve the tea. Most wonderful of all was the collection of curiosities. The Mrs. Philpott explained that the fossils were the remains of ancient sea creatures that had been preserved in the clay. Everything was so interesting that Mary forgot to be nervous. Then Annie Philpott showed her a huge tooth she had found. From a great sea monster, she said. She told Mary she believed the rest of the creature was still out there, hidden in the cliffs. If anyone could ever find that, Mary, that would be the greatest treasure of all. It was nearly dark when Mary ran down the hill. As soon as she pushed open the workshop door, she knew that something was wrong. The workshop was so quiet after Pepper died. To Mary, it felt as if her world had fallen away, like the farmhouse on the cliff edge. And there was no money. Her mother began to sell everything she could think of, and still they went to bed hungry. One evening Mary wandered up to the churchyard. A heavy fog hung over everything. Ragged clouds dragged at a lemon-sliced moon. As she came to the stone that marked Pepper's grave, something moved in the darkness. For a moment Mary was afraid, but coming closer she realised it was nothing but a funny little dog. A little dog with a coat like speckled pepper. The dog bounded over and licked Mary's face. When she turned to walk home, the little dog came too. At last it ran to the workshop and curled under the table. Perhaps you need a friend too, laughed Mary. From that moment, Mary and the dog were never apart. That summer, the town was full of holidaymakers. As Mary and her dog watched the rich ladies and gentlemen wandering the streets, she suddenly had an idea. Perhaps she could sell her curiosities. She dragged a table from the workshop onto the pavement and carefully arranged the fossils from her collection, all except the snake stone around her neck, that she would never part with. She wrote a small sign in her best handwriting, "Curiosities for sale." Then Mary Anning and the little dog sat down to wait. The first to pass were a group of children. They began laughing and pointing at poor Mary. "Stone girl, bone girl, out on your own, girl," they shouted. All day Mary waited. She was just about to pack away her table when a group of ladies and gentlemen came by. "How fascinating," said a lady. "What are they?" asked someone else. "This one would make a delightful brooch." "Or a garden ornament." And so Mary Anning sold her first fossils, and as the rich people strolled away, Mary felt the weight of coins in her pocket. "I knew I was right," she whispered to the dog. "These aren't just ordinary stones, they really are treasures. If only I could find that sea monster." All summer, Mary searched for curiosities for her shop. She borrowed books about fossils from the Mrs. Philpott and learned everything she could. Her mother was delighted with the money that Mary was earning, but she was worried about Mary alone on the dangerous cliffs. Mary reassured her that the little dog would run for help in an emergency. As she searched, Mary thought more and more about the giant sea monster and the cliffs in prehistoric times. She imagined fantastic landscapes inhabited by extraordinary creatures. One morning, Mary was so busy dreaming, she didn't notice that her dog had wandered away. She ran along the beach, calling for him, but he was nowhere to be seen. At last she heard a faint barking, and looking up, she saw the speckled dog high on the sloping side of the cliff. Mary called for him to come down, but the little dog wouldn't move. He was furiously scratching at something in the clay. Mary had no choice. She began to slowly climb the rock face. At last she reached the little ledge where the dog was standing. Her heart missed a beat. She couldn't believe what she saw. Grinning up at Mary was an enormous skull. The little dog had found the sea monster. All morning, Mary scraped furiously with Pepper's hammer. There was more than a skull, a whole skeleton perhaps. but it was far too big for Mary to cope with on her own. Who could help her? Suddenly she remembered the Pepper's older friends, the quarrymen. Leaving the little dog to guard the monster, Mary Anning climbed carefully down to the beach, then ran as fast as she could to the quarry. "I found it," she shouted. "I found the sea monster." In less than 10 minutes, Mary was leading a group of quarrymen carrying picks and shovels up to the side of the cliff. The news spread like fire through the town. "Mary Anning has found the sea monster. Mary Anning has found it." An excited crowd gathered on the beach to watch the excavation. The Mrs. Philpotts arrived in their fine clothes and made a tremendous fuss of Mary. Even the children who had teased her came to watch, but they weren't laughing now. As the evening sun melted into the sea, a strange procession made its way back to town. A small girl, covered in mud, led the crowd. At the back, 6 strong quarrymen carefully carried the bones of a real sea monster, as long as a tree and more than 165 million years old. The skeleton was laid out on the floor of Pepper's workshop for all the world to see. For months afterwards, visitors came to meet the fossil girl of Lyme Regis. Famous scientists came in carriages from London, and even the King of Saxony. It was the most important fossil ever found, they said. They called the monster an Ichthyosaurus, the fish lizard. The museum that bought it paid enough money for Mary and her mother to live happily for the rest of their lives. But the strange thing was, the little speckled dog had gone, as if he had done his work and drifted away. Sometimes Mary imagined she could hear a faint barking from far away in the sea mist. Then Mary Anning would smile and touch the little snake stone around her neck, and step back into the warm workshops where the shelves were filled with treasures from the dark and dangerous rocks. And that's the story of Stone Girl Bone Girl, which is all about Mary Anning. Now this story will be uploaded to the website so you can have a look through it. And I'm sorry about the mistakes I made during it. I've got a bit of a dry throat and I don't seem to be on fine form today. Right, back to the lesson, which is here. So, we had some interesting phrases in that. Crashing cliffs, great waves smashed the little houses, cliffs as soft as melting chocolate. And that's all added into this to add some detail and create some images in your head. But this was not a biography. This was a story. And they did add a bit that may not have been quite true to real life. I wonder if you can think about which bits those might have been. Now, what we're going to be thinking about is the key events of the story and to list them. So what you're going to have to do is look back through the story, either by rewatching the video or by scrolling through it on the document I upload. And you're going to look at each page and think about the key event from that page. So I'm going to show you briefly how we might do that. So I'm going to go right back to the beginning of the story, because we're going to do this in what's called chronological order, i.e. the events as they happened. So, let's go to the first page. So all of this page is about one event. It's all about her being struck by lightning when she was a baby. So all I'm going to do for that is my first key event that I'm going to write about is I'm going to put number 1, Mary Anning struck by lightning. I'm not going to write a long complex sentence because we're making notes. And these need to be notes that we can actually remember later on. So that's literally all I've put. Mary Anning struck by lightning. It's not even a complete sentence. It doesn't matter for this. Okay? All we're going to do is we're going to look through each of the pages and make notes about the key events in her life as shown in the story. So, what I'm going to ask you to do for your task for today is you're going to either use the storyboard sheet that's uploaded, or you can do it any way that you like, to write down the key events, list the key events of the story that tell us about her life in the order they happened. So you're going to look at each page and think, right, what's the main thing that happened? Some of the pages, not a lot will happen, and that's fine. Some of the pages, maybe 2 things happen, but we're only after the key events, not every little thing that happens. So you need to choose what you think are the important bits. You might choose to include a diagram with this to help you remember, and there are some lovely pictures in the book to help you with that. For now, again, apologies for the slight blips in the story. I hope you have a great day, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.